Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So it just so happens that we are in the second half of International Women's Month. This time of year is a really good time for us to start conversations, important conversations about women and how far we have come thanks to so many different movements, putting a spotlight on our voices for reasons that are important on all other times of the year as well. And it seems that this month has been exactly that. There's been a lot of conversations and really highlighting issues, and not only focus on what needs to be done, but on what has been done, how far we've come. During these times that we raise awareness around particular topics, we really need to look into our past, what has got us to the place we're at now. I think there's a lot we can learn from when we look into our past, whether that's not repeating mistakes or understanding what it took and what it takes to enforce change, to celebrate and appreciate people who might not have had that during their time on this earth. In my faith, I believe that each and every one of us has a soul, and for as long as the soul keeps on existing, then you are also always living. It's important to me that we keep our ancestors close by using their name, sharing their photos, talking about their stories. And this woman I wanted to talk about today is somebody who I feel was erased from her time, particularly during the end of her life, and even after her time on earth. I feel like she was continued to be erased, and this is an issue which I feel isn't just about being a woman. I actually feel like this lady was a minority in every sense of the word. There was so much about this woman which put her in the other category in so many ways in her life, and she just continued to shine and fight through that regardless. So this lady shouldn't just be discussed during conversations focused on women, but also race, also class, also sexuality, also controversial, quote unquote, lifestyle choices. And I believe just because society erased her during her time, that doesn't mean we should continue to, because we weren't introduced to her, because we missed the opportunity of knowing what an amazing person this woman was. That doesn't mean we can't teach ourselves now, and I don't think we should learn from that way of thinking. I think we should actually do the exact opposite and speak the name of Pamela Colman Smith. The very fact that I can show you this photo right now and it not be an image that rings any bells is the same reason why I'm bringing this photograph onto the channel. You might not recognize her name, but I promise that almost all of you will be aware of her art. Ironically, she is one of the biggest selling artists there are in the world, but not many people know of her name, have seen her face, even people who are huge fans of the art that she has created. Some of you even likely have it in your home and even interact with it on a regular basis. A good few of you may have even stared at her signature right in the face and wondered what the hell it even was. Does anyone else recognize this? It was the signature of this lady here. She was the illustrator of the Rider-Waite tarot deck, the tarot deck that most of us learnt to love tarot with. This deck is the staple tarot deck and easily the most influential decks. You know, you're likely to see the Rider-Waite tarot deck in every single movie that features tarot or any piece of media that mentions tarot, but it's not your fault that you probably weren't aware of this woman, because her name was conspicuously absent from the box. Her name was simply just pushed to the side despite each and every card featuring her signature. Pamela was not given the recognition she deserved for making the deck everything that it was then and everything that it is now. This original tarot deck that I'm speaking of is widely known as the Rider-Waite tarot deck rather than the Rider-Waite Smith tarot deck that it is now officially termed as. But that's because her name was not officially in the title for so many years. Pamela Colman Smith was a black female witch, activist, suffragette, speculated lesbian woman living in a time where none of those things were celebrated. If you read tarot on a regular basis using the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, then you're looking at over 70 signatures of Pamela, mostly in the corners of all of the cards. Colman Smith was an Aquarius, also known as Pixie to her friends and family. I'm already in love with the fact that we can associate Pamela to such a non-conforming label bashing, boundary breaking woman, and she happens to be an Aquarius. I mean, it doesn't get more perfect than that. In 1878, she was born in London on February the 16th. As someone who lives in the UK, I love the fact that she was born here. Granted, she did spend a lot of her childhood in Manchester in particular, and also Jamaica, but after both her parents had died by the age of 21, in her later years, she actually decided to settle down in Cornwall, which is one of my favourite places. It's a lovely place to live in the southwest of the UK. But her mother was a Jamaican and her dad was a white American. Despite the times, Pixie was an unconventional bohemian artist, despite having next to no money. And there she was, continuing to choose the artistic route. She never married. She devoted basically all of her life to being a creative, creating pieces of art, writing books, illustrating. It seemed that Pam really paved the way for all of the things that we know and love today, which are still considered as unconventional choices and movements. She was part of the suffrage movement. She was part of Victorian magic, which gave birth to so much of what we now know and do within the world of modern pagans. Now, don't get me wrong. There were parts in her life where she did do quite well. She was fairly well known, she was fairly successful in the artist industry, but she never really used that to financially secure herself. She very likely got very little pay for the work she did do. When she was just about to get her degree, her mum had passed away, so she decided to move and leave her university. In her later years, when she moved to Cornwall to settle in a little cottage somewhere, literally the dreams of any pagan witch, she lived with a woman called Nora Lake. Her sexuality was speculated a lot because she never married. And even though she lived with her up until her last days, which was at 71 years old, which is a good age, she still never got to see the impact that her artwork has had on the world. In fact, if she was around today, she would have been a millionaire. Doesn't even cover it, a billionaire. It's just so sad that so many artists don't ever get to see, ironically, how much their art meant to people, which is what so many artists try to prove to others for every day of their waking lives. In fact, it even seems that after she died, the erasure that she experienced in her living years just continued, because it was officially coined as the Rider Tarot deck, and then eventually it was the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. She obviously couldn't fight her own name. There was even a church fire in the building that her records were kept, which would tell us to this day where it was she was buried. She likely didn't have a gravestone because of the very little money that she had when she died, but it just seems that she just continues to vanish into this place of existence that didn't even happen. And this is why I think it's really important to mention her name, to share her story. Bude in Cornwall is actually the place that she spent the last few years of her life, and St. Michael's Church over there is actually where it's speculated she was likely buried. People do often go there to do rituals and to remember her, and I would really love to go there one day because it's not too far from where I was brought up. There's some word of mouth about what exact location she was likely buried, but I'm not really sure where that even came about. But there's a certain area outside of the wood. But this lady was literally a woman way before her time, and if you look into her history, you'll soon start to realize that everything she was and everything about her embodied so many issues that we are still facing to this day. There's actually been a lot of comments and write-ups about her which people have left to do with the impressions that she made on people, and a lot of people confess how difficult and unusual she was to describe as a person. It was hard to place her within a class, within a gender. If we take into account that era, a lady doing the things that she was doing was almost unheard of. After her period of writing books and illustrating, she actually went into stage design, costume design. That wasn't something that woman did then. In fact, even visually, a lot of people saw her as more of a masculine character. She didn't have that feminine, disciplined, submissive, conformed ways about herself which would have been expected of you then. Even her race was speculated so much back then. The Irish poet William Yeats described her as looking exactly like a Japanese. Another source speculated that she might have been part Native American. A British war correspondent, Henry Nevinson, had quoted that she might have been touched with Negro blood. One of Pamela's classmates even described her as looking like a strange African deity. Another source described her as this odd artist mystic girl, resembling a brown squirrel and a Chinese baby and a radiant morning. However, I'll leave this as the last description of her, as I think it's lovely personally. She looked like a goddaughter of a witch and a sister to a fairy. All in all, she clearly left people with questions, and I just think that obviously I never knew of her, never will, but I believe that she may have even had parts of herself that she didn't understand and didn't quite have a terminology for, because back then we didn't, and we also didn't have as much of a deep understanding of our history, who we are and what that means. And I think that wouldn't have bothered her, and I think that she was just proud of who she was, and she felt that the real identity of someone and the real truth of someone is where their heart belongs and what they feel passionate about. She never really seemed to fit neatly in one box, and it doesn't really stop there either, because even within age norms, everything she did was so out of its time. She was described as very mature for her age, and also described physically to look a lot older than she was. During her youth, she was described as an old woman. And the originality that was recognized from her externally just continued internally, as in an interview in 1911 she mentioned how her visit to Ireland was the first time she saw fairies and pixies, and it was during that era she became aware of Celtic spiritualism. So the thing that really got her name out there in the first place within artist circles, particularly in New York and other places abroad, were her miniature theatrical pieces, which were inspired by Jamaican folklore, and also all of her illustrations as well. She actually illustrated a lot of children's books. By the age of 28, she happened to be approached by a photographer who wanted to show her illustrations in his art gallery, which was very different to what he was used to doing, as he was a photographer. But the exhibition did so well. The exhibition that showed her illustrations did the best that gallery had done in the last 2 years. All of Pamela's work was sold, and I believe that guy continued to milk it in a way. He carried on showing her stuff. He even photographed a lot of it and then sold it on for his own benefit and made his own profit from her work. Another example of how she just continues to get erased, but that's the world of creatives too, unfortunately. And it was after this time where she was then approached during her prime time by Waite, who needed someone to illustrate his tarot deck. And the reason that him and Pamela met was because Pamela joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is a British occult society. For context, Ryder is the publisher, Waite is the creator of the deck, and then Smith is the illustrator. And what he came to realize that he needed Pamela for was to illustrate a set of tarot cards that weren't like the others which were already on the market at the moment, because at this time all of the minor arcana cards in tarot were just what you call pip cards. So the 7 of Wands would just be 7 wands, or like the 3 of coins would just be 1 coin, 2 coin, 3 coins on a card. And he wanted the cards to come to life more than that. He wanted it to be easier for the learner, and he wanted it to really speak for itself when you looked at those cards. So Pamela seemed like the perfect person for it. He described Pamela as the most imaginative and abnormally psychic artist. He was aware that she was able to create art that was inspired directly by spirit. This was such a revolutionary thing. They were really creating something new here, a completely new concept. However, just to note, there was one deck called the Solar Bushka, I think it's pronounced, deck, which has a lot of similarities. It was the only deck that was likely to be a big inspiration for Waite and Smith when they created this. And this was an Italian deck made in the 15th century. You can see a lot of similarities if you put that deck up close to the Rider-Waite deck. And it is said that Ryder and Smith viewed the Italian deck when the Solar family gave a set of photographs of it to the British Museum in 1907. So the deck had been completed, the illustrations had been finished, Pamela was done, and it was at that time she had spoken the words, "I've just finished a big job for very little cash." Something which a lot of creatives feel to the bottom of their heart, but also women in that day and age too. What is the deck without its art? She made a huge collaborative effort. I'm looking at you, Three of Pentacles, and yet her name was nowhere to be seen on the box. Pamela was trusted by Smith to work on the illustrations in her own ways, and she also had her own pioneering ideas about how the cards should be read, which a lot of people work with today and are inspired by today, by, you know, taking into account the clothes that the character in the card is wearing, the facial expressions. Are they showing joy, remorse, sadness, fear, sorrow? Look at their posture. How does that describe the card? What's the mood of the colours? How do the colours make you feel? Can you look at the illustration in a way that helps you tell a story? Pamela wanted to encourage people to look on an intuitive level. How can the reader connect with the card from knowledge and awareness that they already have within themselves? There's a lot of articles that speak about how her original art pieces were whitewashed and adapted in a way that made them more approachable. And I think it's important to mention that when the deck went on the market, it cost 6 shillings, which is a massive deal. That's a lot of money for the time. So it really is a matter of fact when I tell you that Pamela paved the way for what we know as tarot today. This was a groundbreaking new concept. This was truly the way that tarot was popularized. She received no royalties. She had very little money for such a successful product, and she wasn't even a widely celebrated person either. She didn't even get the popularity that she should have. In fact, the last few years of her life, she just wanted to disappear away into her own little home with someone she cared very much for. She would have watched Waite enjoy the fame and the financial comfort that this big move made him, and we won't ever really know how much that affected her, if it affected her to the same degree that it would affect you and me, because I get the feeling that she was above all of that sort of stuff anyway. I really believe that she just loved what she did. She loved to create. It was what she was supposed to do. She actually had this, there's a condition, is that the word? There are certain people who can see music, so they see shapes and they're able to visualize music in another way that's normal to you and I. She had that ability and she worked with that in her art, and she just created because that's everything she knew. There were many projects that she worked on outside of this deck which didn't take off in the same way that this deck did. It's interesting how this project took off so well when it was pushed and promoted by a white male figure, but hey, we won't get into that now. She was able to buy that cottage in Cornwall though in her later years because of her uncle passing away, so she used that money to kind of set herself up somewhere that I feel was probably away from that London life, the hustle and bustle. I think she wanted to disassociate herself a little bit from the first half of her life, really. The occupation that was listed on her death certificate was spinster of independent means. Now, a spinster is a woman who didn't marry or is unlikely to marry. She was never listed as an artist, and the little amount of money she was making was through running a home for Catholic priests. But the massive amounts of debt she was in after she died was paid off at an auction just by little amount of art she did have left over in the house, and the cottage that she owned was willed to her quote-unquote flatmate Nora Lake. As I said earlier on in the video, her sexuality was speculated a lot, and this relationship that she had with Nora Lake was speculated a lot too. Because she never married, she never associated herself to many men. She hung around with a lot of women. She preferred the company of women at the very least, but a lot of people felt that she likely was in a romantic relationship with Nora. Nora was a Cancer, by the way. I looked that up. Got very excited by the idea of a Cancer dating Aquarius because that's me and my boyfriend. Not to mention that she was very good friends with the actress Edith Craig. Edith Craig was an open bisexual. Edith Craig was a self-proclaimed spiritualist, activist, artist, just like Pam, and you know, people associating Pixie Pam to this lady. People speculated, but also just to add the cherry on top of these out-the-box lifestyle choices, Edith actually lived with a couple and lived with this couple for many years, and a lot of people have also speculated on that being a very polyamorous way of living, and Pam being associated to that type of living could have potentially meant that there is even more depth beneath the stuff that we are already wondering about this woman. But hey, I won't ever know that, you won't ever know that. It's got suspiciously dark in this room as I've started mentioning this. We could speculate whether she was polyamorous, whether she was pansexual due to her free-spirited ways of living, her ability to just love who she wanted, what she wanted, why she wanted, and even break the rules of gender and everything that means, particularly for those times. We won't ever know truly what she was, who she was, what she even knew she was, and if she had terms to refer herself to. I just really feel that everything that she stood for and believed in was simply because it came from within, and she wasn't interested in everything that externally could have stopped her. And fun fact, speaking of Edith Craig, she was actually the model for the Queen of Wands court card. So if any of you ever struggle with that card, that's a little fun tip, because you can kind of associate what I've said to you about these kinds of women that she hung out with to help describe the Queen of Wands and everything the Queen of Wands stands for, believes in, feels. It's a very enthusiastic, happy, positive card to get. And in my opinion, from what I've learned about Pamela. She surrounded herself in creative people, intelligent people who valued her passion for art and her exotic appearance, as well as her free spirit. Her belief in being whatever the hell she wanted, whatever the hell made her happy, regardless of the time, was evident. And she loved who she loved and what she loved. Not to mention that Black women have been at the helm of metaphysical practice and holistic healing for centuries, yet that seems to get forgotten about. I'm unsure on why it's necessary to displace Black women from the movement as if they have no voice. I actually read this lovely little story online where a group of witches from America travelled to that graveyard that Pam was supposedly buried in to take part in a ritual. And it says here, "We opened ourselves and spoke words into the air, telling her of what had happened since she had passed away. We thanked her for her art, her life, her vision. We asked ourselves questions as to why there was no sign, no marker at all that said that she lay somewhere in that earth. As we were speaking so, birds began to sing, louder and louder. Our eyes were drawn to the countless primroses that covered the ground of the churchyard, then to our feet, where upon one unmarked grave, a single pink primrose grew, one among many, around which a large black beetle walked alone. One single pink primrose among a sea of yellow. Not everything nature gives us is a sign. Sometimes nature is just doing nature things, but sometimes one gets a distinct feeling that something else is going on, and that was one of those moments. I reached down and touched the earth of the unmarked grave. Was she there? Who knows? And in truth, it doesn't matter. Her spirit was in the grass, in the trees, the very air of that place. Her spirit is in the card I pulled from my deck this morning. We just wanted to show her some respect, some love, and speak her name so she would know that she is remembered. For what is remembered lives." Obviously, tarot was a massive part of her career and a really important part of her life, but I also think she's a great figure for this time. Her life is an amazing example of everything that is happening right here, right now. And even identity, let's not forget about the fact that she didn't sit in any gender norms, and in fact, in this day and age, we would consider her non-binary perhaps. She was really trying to thrive and push herself into male spaces. And I want to finish this video by reading an article written by Pam herself in 1908, and it was called "Should the Art Student Think?" A section of it, I won't read all of it, says, "I have heard it said that half the world has nothing to say. Perhaps the other half has, but it is afraid to speak. Banish fear, brace your courage, place your ideal high up with the sun, away from the dirt and ugliness around you, and let that power that makes the roar of the high power presses enter your work, energy, courage, life, love." This is literally making me emotional to read. I know it sounds really dramatic. Use your wits, use your eyes. Perhaps you use your physical eye. Let me start again. Use your wits, use your eyes. Perhaps you use your physical eyes too much and only see the mask. Find eyes within. Look for the door into the unknown country. This is her own way of describing intuition, and also that piece demonstrates how it's not far-fetched to ever dream big. And anyone can say those words, anyone can write that piece, but I think what makes that more magical is the fact that she demonstrated it too. She really tried to construct an identity in response to the views that people had around her. So this video is my own way to honour a woman who played such a pivotal role in divination, because she was tossed aside, a intuitive, creative, black, lesbian, witch, activist, psychic, artist, Aquarius, possibly polyamorous, open-hearted, non-binary woman. It doesn't stop. I will continue to say her name, speak her story, and honour her every time I reach for my cards and use my cards. And now I will see the images on them so much more differently. I will light a candle and pay my respect every time I interact with them, because I feel that's what she would have wanted, not for reasons of fame or attention, but because I think she would want to know that she's touched people enough to show their own worth and do what feels right for them and speak their own truths and be the person that they want to be, just because they feel it in their heart, and not because anyone's telling them to, or they're being shoved into a box of any kind. And I want to thank you for listening to me talk about that and discuss that, and I hope that this story spoke to you in one way or another. I would love it if you could let me know whether you knew of Pamela. Have you heard of her story before? Is this the first time you're hearing of her? There's actually a book which I really want to get hold of myself. It's called The Untold Story. I'll leave a link to it in the description box below, but it covers a lot more information and detail that I haven't even touched upon about her life. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave that there. I will eventually get it myself. I haven't yet read it. And I want to say happy International Women's Month. I hope that you celebrate all the women in your life that have made an impact on you, and also inspire you to carry on pushing boundaries and enforcing equality. Thanks for watching. I'm on social media such as Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. I have a tarot reading Facebook page and a tarot based Instagram account. If you want to follow me on any of those, all the links are going to be down there. Subscribe to this channel to be notified every time I make a brand new video, and if you liked this kind of video, do give me a thumbs up so I know that this sort of thing is enjoyed. Thanks everyone, and I will see you very soon. Bye!